"Stop, cowboy! You gave me shelter. Now I'm bound to warm your bed." The wind came like a wall of cold. It hit the road and pushed against the wagon, making it shake and shiver. Lena pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and tried to keep her face hidden from the snow. She had been traveling for days, and her body was tired, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. She looked ahead, but the road was almost invisible. The snow fell so thickly that it felt like she was walking inside a white curtain. Her horse, a strong brown mare, walked slowly, step by step. The animal was tired too. Lena knew they needed to find shelter soon, or the cold would take them. She tried to remember the last town she passed. It had been a small place, with a few houses and a lonely store. She had stopped there to buy food and to rest, but the storm had started so fast that she hadn't been able to leave. Now the town was far behind her, and the world around her looked empty. The wagon's wheels suddenly made a strange sound. A loud crack echoed through the air. Lena stopped the horse and jumped down, her boots sinking into the snow. She looked at the wheel, and her heart sank. One of the wooden spokes had broken. Her hands were shaking. She had fixed broken wheels before, but never in weather like this. The cold was biting into her fingers. She tried to remove the broken spoke, but her gloves were too thick, and the snow kept falling into her eyes. "Come on," she whispered, more to herself than to the horse. "Just a little more." She tried to lift the wagon, but it was too heavy. She leaned against it and took a deep breath. The storm made it hard to think. The snow sounded like a million tiny voices, all whispering at once. She knew she had to make a choice. She could try to fix the wheel, but the storm was getting worse. Or she could leave the wagon and find help. But there was no help here. Just snow. Just cold. She looked around, searching for any sign of life. At first, she saw nothing. Then, far in the distance, she saw a small shape. A building, maybe a cabin. It was hard to tell through the snow, but it was the only thing she could see besides the white road. Lena felt a strange feeling in her chest. Hope. Fear. Both at once. She didn't want to leave her wagon. It was her only home on the road. It held her belongings, her clothes, and the few things she owned. But she also knew that if she stayed here, she might not survive the night. She climbed back onto the wagon and looked at the horse. "We're going," she said softly. "We're going to that cabin." The mare moved forward slowly, as if she understood. The wind pushed harder, and Lena had to lean into it. Snow hit her face, and her eyes burned. She kept going, one step at a time. The cabin grew closer, but it was still far. Lena's muscles began to ache. Her breath came out in small clouds, and she could feel the cold inside her bones. She wondered if she was making a mistake. Maybe the cabin was empty. Maybe it belonged to someone dangerous. Maybe it was only a ruin. But she had no choice. She kept walking. Finally, she reached the edge of the cabin's small clearing. The roof was covered in snow, and the windows were dark. The door looked old, but it was closed. Lena's heart pounded. She walked up to the door and knocked, her hand shaking. The sound was small in the storm, but it felt loud to her. She knocked again, harder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from inside, she heard a slow step. The door opened a little, and a man's face appeared. He was tall, with strong features and a serious expression. His eyes were calm, but his gaze was sharp, like a man who had seen many hard things. He looked at Lena, then at her wagon and horse, and then back at her face. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice low. Lena tried to speak, but the words came out weak. "My wheel broke," she said. I need shelter, please." The man looked at her for a moment longer. He didn't smile. He didn't show kindness at first. But then he stepped back, and the door opened wider. "Come in," he said. "You'll freeze out here?" Lena didn't move at first. She felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if she could trust him. But the cold was stronger than her fear. She nodded quickly and stepped inside. The cabin was small, but warm. A fire burned in the stove, and the air smelled like wood smoke. Lena felt the heat immediately, and her body relaxed a little. She took off her coat and gloves, and the warmth felt like a gift. The man closed the door behind her. He stood near the stove, watching her. He didn't move much, but he seemed calm and in control. "My name is Caleb," he said. "You're lucky I found you." The storm came fast. Lena swallowed. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Lena." Caleb nodded once. "You're safe here for the night. I can't promise more than that." Lena's eyes widened. "Just for one night?" Caleb looked at her carefully. "The storm might last longer, but I can't keep you here forever. I have work to do." Lena felt her face heat up. She didn't like the way he said it. It sounded like he was saying she was a problem. "I understand," she said quickly. "I'll leave when the weather clears." Caleb didn't answer. He simply turned and walked toward a small table. On the table were a few simple things: bread, cheese, and a small jar of honey. He grabbed the jar and offered it to her. "Eat," he said. Lena hesitated. She didn't want to seem rude, but she also didn't want to appear too grateful. She took the bread and cheese anyway, and she sat at the table. Her hands were still shaking, but she tried to eat slowly. Caleb watched her as she ate. He didn't speak. He only stood there, silent and quiet, like the storm outside. After a while, Lena looked up. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me." Caleb's eyes met hers. "Because you're human," he said simply. "Because I've been alone too long. Because I know what it feels like to be lost." Lena didn't know what to say. The words were simple, but they felt heavy. She could feel the truth in them. She finished her food and looked around the cabin. It was clean, but plain. A bed sat in one corner, covered with a thick blanket. A few tools hung on the wall. A rifle leaned against the stove. Everything looked practical, not decorative. Lena stood up and moved toward the bed. "Is that for me?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "It's for you. It's the only bed in the cabin." Lena felt a strange wave of shame. She didn't want to sleep in a man's cabin. She didn't want to be in his space. She didn't want to owe him anything. But the bed looked warm. The blanket looked soft. The thought of sleeping in the cold outside made her body ache. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said. Caleb's voice was calm. "You're not causing trouble," he said. "You're just surviving." Lena stared at him for a moment. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe him, but her past had taught her to be careful. People who offered help often wanted something in return. She looked down at her hands. "Appa, I can pay you," she said quietly. "I can work. I can do something." Caleb shook his head. "You don't need to pay me," he said. "Just stay warm." Lena felt tears rise in her eyes. She quickly blinked them away. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want to seem weak, but she couldn't help feeling grateful. I gazed off at everywhere. She also couldn't help feeling scared. The cabin felt safe, but it also felt like a trap. She was alone with a man she barely knew. She walked toward the bed and sat down on the edge. The blanket felt warm under her fingers. She looked at Caleb again. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb nodded once. "Get some rest," he said. "The storm will decide what happens next." Lena lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. She listened to the sound of the wind outside, and she kept thinking about the road and her broken wagon. She thought about how she had ended up here. She thought about the people she had left behind. She thought about her life before she started traveling. She had lived in a small town, working in a shop. She had dreams of a better life, but she didn't know how to reach it. When things became too difficult, she had left. She had wanted freedom. Now she realized freedom was not always safe. She looked at the door and then at Caleb. He was sitting near the stove, watching the fire. He looked tired, but his eyes were steady. He seemed like a man who didn't waste words. Lena closed her eyes and tried to rest. She told herself that tomorrow would be easier. The storm would pass, and she would fix her wagon. She would leave this cabin and continue her journey. But deep inside, she felt a new feeling, a feeling she didn't want to admit. She felt a sense of being watched, but not in a bad way, more like someone caring. She didn't know if she could trust Caleb. She didn't know if she could trust anyone again. But for the first time in days, she felt a small warmth in her heart. Not from the fire, from the fact that someone had offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. Morning came slowly. The storm outside did not stop. It only grew stronger. Lena woke up before the sun could rise. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fire. The warmth felt good, but her body still felt weak from the cold of the night before. She sat up and wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She looked at the bed beside her and realized she had slept longer than she expected. The blanket had kept her warm, but she still felt the chill in her bones. She stepped out of bed and walked to the small table. A cup sat there, filled with water. She drank slowly, letting the water slide down her throat. She tried to remember the last time she had felt this safe. Then she heard a sound. The door creaked open, and Caleb stepped inside. He wore a thick coat and a hat that looked old but clean. His face looked tired, but his eyes were steady. He stopped when he saw Lena. He didn't smile, but he didn't look angry either. He simply nodded. "Morning," he said. Lena nodded back. "Morning," she answered. She didn't know what else to say. She felt awkward. She felt like she was in a place where she did not belong. Caleb walked to the stove and checked the fire. He added a few pieces of wood, and the flames grew higher. He then turned to Lena. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. Lena hesitated. She didn't want to tell him she had been afraid. She didn't want to show weakness, but she also didn't want to lie. "I slept," she said quietly. Caleb nodded again. "Good," he said. "You'll need your strength." Lena looked at him, confused. "Why?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, where the storm was still raging. He seemed to be thinking. "The road is blocked," he said finally. "The snow is too deep. You can't leave today." Lena felt her heart sink. She had hoped the storm would end. She had hoped she could fix the wheel and continue. But now she realized she might be here longer than she wanted. "I understand," she said. She tried to sound calm, but her voice shook slightly. Caleb looked at her carefully. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said, "but you can't go out there alone." Lena felt a strange feeling in her chest. She didn't want to stay, but she also didn't want to go outside. She looked at the door, then back at Caleb. "What if I wait until the storm stops?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "That is what you should do," he said. "But you should not be outside in this weather." Lena stared at him. "How long will it last?" she asked. Caleb shrugged. "A day, maybe 2.
Could be more. Storms like this can last longer than you think."
Lena swallowed. She didn't like the sound of that. She had things to do. She had a life to live. She had a plan. She didn't want to be stuck here, but she also knew she had no choice. She sat down at the table again. The cabin felt smaller now. It felt like a trap. She could feel the weight of being in someone else's home. She tried to focus on the small tasks she could do. She looked at the table and saw the bread and cheese from the night before. She picked up a piece and broke it in half. The bread was fresh, but simple. She ate slowly, trying to keep her mind busy. Caleb watched her quietly. He didn't say anything. He simply stood near the stove as if he was guarding the cabin. Lena finished eating and looked at him. "What do you do here?" she asked. Caleb paused. "I work on the ranch," he said. "I take care of the land. I keep things running." Lena nodded. She could feel the honesty in his voice. It didn't sound proud. It didn't sound boastful. He sounded like a man who lived a quiet life. Lena wanted to ask more, but she didn't want to seem too curious. She didn't want to seem like she was trying to know too much. She was still afraid of getting too close to someone. She stood up and walked toward the window. She looked out at the snow. It was falling thickly, and the world outside looked like a white desert. She felt a sudden sadness. She had wanted to travel to a new place, to find a new life. Now she felt like she was trapped in a place she didn't know. She turned back to Caleb. "I can fix the wheel," she said. "If the storm stops, I can fix it." Caleb nodded slowly. "Maybe," he said, "but it will be hard. The wood might be frozen. The tools might be covered." Lena's voice became firmer. "I can do it," she said. "I've done it before." Caleb looked at her with a small, quiet expression. "You're strong," he said. Lena felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't like being praised. She didn't like the attention. But she also felt a small warmth inside. It was nice to be seen as capable. Then she heard a sound outside. It was faint, but she could hear it. Something moving in the snow. Caleb turned toward the door. He listened carefully. The sound grew louder. It sounded like footsteps. Lena's heart raced. She stood still, not knowing what to do. Caleb reached for the rifle by the stove. He held it in his hands, not pointing it, but ready. He looked at Lena and nodded. "Stay inside," he said quietly. Lena nodded. She felt fear rise in her chest. She didn't know who was outside. She didn't know if they were dangerous. She didn't know if Caleb would protect her. The door opened, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and wore a heavy coat. His face was covered in snow. He looked tired and cold. He stopped when he saw Lena. He looked at her for a moment, then at Caleb. "Sorry to bother you," he said. His voice was rough. "But my horse is hurt. I need help." Caleb lowered the rifle slightly, but he didn't relax completely. He looked at the man carefully. "What happened?" Caleb asked. The man stepped closer. "The storm hit fast," he said. "My horse slipped and twisted its leg. I can't move it. I need to get to shelter." Lena felt a small relief. The man didn't look dangerous. He looked like someone who was struggling. Caleb looked at Lena, then back at the man. "Come in," he said. The man nodded and stepped inside. He looked around the cabin, then toward the fire. He moved slowly, like his body was tired from the cold. Lena watched him carefully. She felt a strange feeling again. She didn't want to be in the same room with a stranger. She didn't know how to feel safe. The man looked at her and smiled slightly. "You're lucky," he said. "This place is warm." Lena didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. She felt uncomfortable. Caleb moved toward the stove and set a pot of water to heat. He looked at the man and asked, "Do you have a name?" The man nodded. "My name is Jonas." Caleb nodded. "Jonas?" he repeated. "You can stay here until the storm passes." Jonas looked grateful. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't think I would make it." Lena felt the cabin become even smaller. 2 men and her. She felt like she was trapped in a place where she didn't belong. She tried to keep her thoughts quiet. She didn't want to show fear. She didn't want to seem weak. Caleb moved toward her and spoke quietly. "You don't need to be afraid," he said. "You're safe." Lena looked at him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to scare her. He was just telling her the truth. She nodded slowly. "I know," she said. But inside, she still felt uneasy. She didn't know how long she would be here. She didn't know if she could trust Caleb. She didn't know if she could trust Jonas. She sat back down at the table and tried to calm her breathing. She stared at the fire and tried to focus on its warmth. She tried to remind herself that she was safe. Outside, the storm continued. The wind howled, and the snow fell like a heavy curtain. Inside, the cabin felt warm, but the air felt tense. Lena realized that being saved was not always easy. Sometimes it meant staying in a place where you didn't feel free. Sometimes it meant facing your fears again. She looked at Caleb. She looked at Jonas. She wondered what tomorrow would bring. And she wondered if she would ever be able to leave. The storm continued to rage outside. The snow piled higher, and the wind kept hitting the cabin like a strong hand pushing against the walls. Inside, the air was warm, but the mood felt heavy. The 3 of them sat in silence, each one thinking in their own way. Lena watched Caleb closely. He moved calmly, like he had done this many times before. He checked the fire, added wood, and then sat back down. He didn't talk much. He didn't smile. He only acted with quiet strength. Jonas sat near the door, his shoulders still tense. He kept his coat on as if he was still outside. His eyes looked tired, and his hands were rough and cold. He stared at the floor for a long time, like he was trying to remember something. Lena felt uncomfortable. She didn't know how to behave. She didn't know if she should speak or stay quiet. She felt like a guest in someone else's home, and she didn't want to cause trouble. Finally, Lena stood up. She walked to the small shelf and picked up a cup. She filled it with water and brought it to Jonas. "Here," she said softly. "Drink." Jonas looked up, surprised. "Thank you," he said. He took the cup and drank slowly. He looked at Lena for a moment, and his eyes softened a little. Lena felt a small warmth in her chest. It was the first time someone had looked at her without suspicion. She realized she could be kind, even in a place that felt unsafe. Caleb watched her and nodded once, like he approved. After a while, Jonas spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "I didn't mean to trouble you," he said. "I just didn't know where else to go." Caleb looked at him. "The storm is bad," he said. "You're welcome here, but you need to rest. You need to warm up." Jonas nodded. "I will," he said. Lena listened to their conversation, but she still felt uneasy. She couldn't help thinking about the past. She remembered the day she left her old life. She remembered the fear. She remembered the feeling of being trapped. She didn't want to feel that again. She looked at Caleb and wondered what his story was. She knew he had been alone for a long time. She knew he had lost something important. But she didn't know the details. She didn't know what had happened to him. She wanted to ask, but she didn't want to seem too curious. She didn't want to become a problem for him. So she stayed quiet. Jonas stood up slowly. He moved toward the stove and held his hands near the fire. His face looked tired, but he seemed calmer now. Lena watched him and noticed something. Jonas was not a dangerous man. He was just someone who needed help. He looked like someone who had been through hard times. But Lena still felt the fear. She still felt the fear of being alone with men. She still felt the fear of being trapped. She looked at Caleb again. He had a calm look in his eyes, but she could see something else too. A sadness, a deep sadness, like a man who had lost someone he loved. Lena felt her heart soften. She wanted to understand him. She wanted to know why he was so quiet. She took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Caleb," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" Caleb looked at her. "Yes," he said. Lena hesitated. She didn't know how to start. She didn't want to offend him. She didn't want to make him angry. I want to know why you live here alone," she said. "What happened to you?" Caleb's face did not change. He looked at the fire for a moment. Then he sighed. "My wife died," he said quietly. "It was years ago." Lena felt her chest tighten. She didn't know what to say. She felt sorry for him. She didn't know the details, but she could feel the pain in his voice. Sorry, she said softly. Caleb nodded once. "She died in the spring," he said. "We had a small life, simple, but I loved her. When she was gone, everything felt empty. I stayed here because it was the only place that felt like home." Lena listened carefully. She could feel his pain. She could feel the emptiness in his words. She realized that Caleb was not a cold man. He was a man who had learned to protect himself by staying quiet. He had built a life of silence to keep his heart safe. Lena looked at him and felt a small connection. She understood him in a way she didn't expect. She too had learned to protect herself. She too had built walls around her heart. She wanted to tell him about her own past. She wanted to tell him how she left her old life, how she had been afraid, and how she had wanted to find freedom, but she didn't know if she could trust him yet. She decided to wait. Jonas spoke again, breaking the quiet. "You two seem to know each other," he said, looking between them. Lena felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't like Jonas watching them like that. Caleb looked at Jonas. "We don't," he said. "She is just a traveler who needed shelter." Jonas nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. He looked at Lena again. "You're lucky you found him," he said. "He's a good man." Lena looked at Caleb, and she felt a strange feeling. She didn't want Jonas to speak about Caleb like that. She didn't want anyone to think she was his guest, or his responsibility. She wanted to be independent, but she also felt a small comfort. It was nice to hear someone say that Caleb was good. Caleb moved closer to the fire and sat down. He looked at Lena again. "Do you want to talk?" he asked. Lena felt surprised. She didn't expect him to ask. She didn't know what to say. She thought about her past. She thought about her fears. She thought about the road and her broken wagon. She thought about how she had ended up here. She took a deep breath and began. "I left my home because I was afraid," she said. "I didn't feel safe there. I wanted to start over. I wanted to be free." Caleb listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He simply listened. Lena continued, "But I didn't realize how hard it would be," she said. "I didn't realize how lonely it would feel. I didn't realize how scared I would be." She looked down. "I thought I could do it alone," she said. "But now I'm not so sure." Caleb nodded slowly. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. Lena looked up, surprised. She didn't know what to think. She didn't know if he was offering help or something else. She waited for him to continue. Caleb spoke again, his voice calm. "You're safe here," he said. "You can stay until the storm passes. You can rest. You can regain your strength." Lena felt her eyes fill with tears again. She quickly blinked them away. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want to look weak. But she couldn't help feeling grateful. She realized something important. She didn't owe Caleb anything. He had offered help without asking for anything in return. That thought felt strange to her. She had never experienced it before. She had always felt like help came with a price. But this was different. This was real. She looked at Caleb and smiled slightly. "Thank you," she said. Caleb nodded once. "You're welcome," he said. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin, something changed. The air felt lighter. The tension seemed to fade a little. Lena felt a small hope. She realized that maybe she could trust someone again. But she also knew that trust would take time. She knew that she couldn't rush. She knew that she couldn't let her guard down completely. She looked at Jonas again. He seemed calmer now. He had taken off his coat and sat near the fire. He was quiet, but he seemed less tense. Lena realized that the cabin was no longer a trap. It was a place where people were surviving the storm together. It was a place where kindness existed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if the storm would end. She didn't know if she would leave or stay, but she knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The storm finally began to weaken. The wind still blew, but the snow slowed down. The white world outside started to look less frightening. Lena could see the trees moving gently instead of being pushed hard. She felt a small relief, but she didn't feel completely safe yet. She had learned that storms could change quickly, and she didn't want to get too hopeful. Inside the cabin, the mood had changed too. The air felt warmer and lighter. The three of them moved more freely. The silence was no longer heavy. It felt calm. Caleb stood by the stove checking the fire. He looked at the small pot of water, and then he looked at Lena. "Eat something," he said. "You need your strength." Lena nodded. She had been eating, but not much. The fear had taken her appetite. But now, with the storm slowing, she felt more hungry. She sat at the table and took the bread and cheese. She ate slowly, thinking about what would happen next. Jonas was already sitting near the fire, warming his hands. He looked calmer now. He seemed more like a man who had found shelter rather than a stranger who had entered someone else's home. Lena watched him for a moment. She wondered if he would leave soon. She wondered if the cabin would become quiet again, like it had been before. She looked at Caleb and asked, "Do you think the storm is almost over?" Caleb looked out the window. The snow was still falling, but less. The sky was beginning to show a hint of gray, like the sun might appear soon. "It's getting better," he said. "But the road is still dangerous." Lena nodded. "I understand," she said. Caleb turned to her. "If you want to leave, we can go together," he said. "I can help you get the wagon fixed." Lena felt a strange feeling in her chest. She didn't know how to react. She had expected him to say she should leave alone. She had not expected him to offer help. She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said quietly. Caleb shook his head. "You're not causing trouble," he said. "You're just trying to survive." Lena looked up at him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. He meant what he said. She thought about the past days. She thought about the fear she had felt. She thought about how she had felt trapped. She thought about the way Caleb had treated her with respect. She realized she had started to trust him, but she still had a fear that she couldn't shake. She wondered if she was being too trusting. She wondered if she was putting herself in danger. She looked at Caleb and asked, "Why are you helping me?" Caleb looked at her for a moment. He seemed to think carefully before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone," he said. "Because I know what it feels like to have no one. Because I don't want you to suffer." Lena felt her eyes fill with tears again. She blinked them away quickly. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She whispered, "Thank you." Caleb nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words. After a while, Lena stood up and began to help around the cabin. She wanted to feel useful. She wanted to show that she was not just a guest. She wanted to show that she could do something. She started by gathering wood. She stepped outside for a moment, and the cold air hit her face. The snow was still falling, but not as hard. She could see the ground now, not completely covered. The trees looked heavy with snow, but they were not bending as much. She brought the wood inside and stacked it near the stove. Caleb watched her, but he didn't say anything. He simply moved around, doing his own tasks. Lena felt a sense of purpose. It felt good to do something. It felt good to be helpful. After a while, Caleb spoke. "You don't have to do all of that," he said. Lena shook her head. "I want to," she said. "I don't want to feel like I owe you." Caleb looked at her. "You don't owe me anything," he said again. "You owe yourself rest." Lena smiled slightly. She appreciated his words. She felt a new respect for him. He was not a man who demanded. He was a man who gave. She looked at Jonas and realized he was listening. Jonas had stopped moving. He was watching Lena and Caleb quietly. Lena felt a strange feeling. She realized that Jonas was not just a stranger. He was someone who had also been helped. He had also been welcomed. She felt a sense of connection with him, even though they barely spoke. As the day passed, the storm continued to calm. The snow outside turned into a soft, quiet fall. The world seemed peaceful. Lena and Caleb spent more time talking. Their conversations were simple at first, but they grew deeper. They talked about the land, about the work, about life. Lena learned that Caleb had lived in this area for years. He knew the land like the back of his hand. He knew where the best water was, where the animals liked to graze, and where the wind could be strongest. Lena began to admire his knowledge. She realized he was not just a quiet man. He was a strong man. He was a man who had survived hard times and had learned how to live alone. She began to feel respect for him, not just fear. One evening, as the light outside grew dim, Caleb asked Lena to sit by the fire. He sat across from her and spoke quietly. "Do you want to stay here longer?" he asked. Lena felt her heart beat faster. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to stay forever. She didn't want to become someone who depended on another person. But she also didn't want to leave. She had started to feel safe. She had started to feel cared for. She had started to feel like she belonged somewhere. She looked at Caleb and said, "I don't know." He did not push her. He did not demand an answer. He simply accepted her honesty. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "You don't have to decide right now." Lena felt a relief. She felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't have to make a decision immediately. She could take her time. She looked at Caleb and asked, "Will you help me fix my wagon?" Caleb smiled slightly. "Yes," he said. "When the snow stops, we will go out and fix it." Lena felt a small happiness. She could feel her life moving forward again. But deep inside, she still felt a fear. She wondered if she would ever be able to trust a man again. She wondered if she would ever be able to live without fear. She looked at Caleb and realized he was not trying to force her into anything. He was not asking for anything in return. He was simply offering help. That thought felt strange. It felt almost impossible. Lena realized that the storm had changed her life, not just because it had forced her to stop, but because it had brought her to a place where kindness existed without price. She looked at the fire and thought about the future. She didn't know what it would bring. She didn't know if she would stay or leave, but she knew one thing. She had found a place where she could breathe again. The storm finally ended. The snow stopped falling, and the sky began to clear. The world outside looked bright and new, like a fresh page. The trees were covered in white, and the ground looked soft and silent. The air was cold, but it felt calm. Lena stood by the window and watched the snow slowly stop. She felt a strange mix of emotions. She was relieved that the storm was over, but she also felt a sadness. She had grown used to the cabin, to the warmth, and to the quiet life. She had grown used to being safe. She looked at her wagon outside. It was covered in snow, but it was still there. The broken wheel was visible. She knew she could fix it now, but she didn't feel the same urgency she had felt before. She had learned that there was more to life than just moving forward. She turned away from the window and walked toward the table. Caleb was already preparing food. He moved with calm confidence, like he had done this for years. Jonas sat near the fire, warming his hands. He looked relaxed now, as if the storm had washed away some of his worries. Lena sat down and took a deep breath. She looked at Caleb and said, "The storm is over." Caleb nodded. "Yes," he said. "We can go out soon." Lena looked at him, her eyes searching. She wanted to ask him something, but she didn't know how to say it. She didn't want to sound needy. She didn't want to seem like she was asking for too much. She thought about leaving. She thought about going back to her old life. She thought about the life she had tried to escape. She thought about the fear she had felt there. She thought about the freedom she had wanted. She realized that she didn't want to go back to that life. She didn't want to go back to the fear. She didn't want to go back to the loneliness. She looked at Caleb and felt a new feeling in her chest. It was not fear. It was not shame. It was something else, something that felt like hope. She stood up and walked to Caleb. She looked at him carefully. "I want to stay," she said. Caleb's eyes softened. He looked at her for a moment. He didn't say anything. He didn't rush her. He just listened. Lena continued. "I know I can leave," she said. "I know I can go back to the road. But I don't want to. Not anymore." Caleb nodded slowly. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. Lena shook her head. "I do," she said. "I want to decide now. I want to stay." Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, Lena saw a small smile on his face. It was quiet, but real. It was not a big smile, but it was a smile that meant something. "Are you sure?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." Caleb stood up and walked toward her. He placed his hand on her shoulder, gently. It was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot. Lena felt a small warmth spread through her body. "You don't owe me anything," Caleb said. "You know that, right?" Lena looked at him. "I know," she said. "But I want to stay. Not because I owe you, but because I feel safe here." Caleb nodded. "Good," he said. He turned toward Jonas. "Jonas," he said, "you can go now. The road is clear." Jonas looked up. He looked at the two of them. He seemed to understand that something had changed. "Thank you," Jonas said quietly. "For the shelter, for the fire, for everything." Caleb nodded. "You're welcome," he said. "Be careful out there." Jonas stood up and grabbed his coat. He walked toward the door and stepped outside. The snow was bright and soft, and the air felt clean. Jonas took a deep breath, and then he walked away, disappearing into the white world. Lena watched him go. She felt a small sadness, but she also felt a sense of peace. She realized that the storm had brought people together. It had brought her to a place where she could find safety. She turned back to Caleb. "Are you going to help me fix the wagon?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes," he said. "We will do it together." They stepped outside. The cold air hit Lena's face, but she felt stronger now. The snow crunched under her boots. She walked to the wagon and looked at the broken wheel. The wood was frozen and cracked. The wheel looked damaged, but not impossible to fix. Caleb stood beside her, looking at the wheel. He took his tools out and began to work. Lena watched him carefully. She didn't want to get in the way, but she also wanted to help. "Here," Caleb said, handing her a small hammer.
"Hold this." Lena took it and held it carefully. She felt nervous, but she also felt excited.
She felt like she was part of something. She felt like she belonged. They worked together, slowly and carefully. Caleb taught her how to remove the broken pieces and how to replace them. Lena listened and followed his instructions. She realized that she was learning more than just fixing a wheel. She was learning how to trust again. After a while, the wheel was fixed. The wagon looked ready to move again. Lena felt a sense of pride. She had done something. She had not only survived, but she had also learned and grown. Caleb looked at her and nodded. "Good job," he said. Lena smiled. "Thank you," she said. They finished their work and stood back to look at the wagon. It looked strong again. It looked like a new beginning. Lena felt a new sense of hope. She realized that she could start a new life here, if she wanted to. She realized that she didn't have to run anymore. Caleb looked at her and spoke softly. "You can stay here," he said. "If you want." Lena looked at him and felt a warmth in her heart. She knew she had found something she had been searching for. Not just shelter, not just safety, but a place where she could belong. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "I want to stay." Caleb nodded again. "Then you will?" he said. They walked back to the cabin, and Lena felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The storm was over, and her life had changed. She had found shelter, kindness, and trust. She had found a new beginning, and for the first time, she felt like she had a home.